The coffin flood. For all we know, hundreds of bodies have been washed down the river, and some of them have gone into the sea. The horror of Manchester's worst flood. The flooded River Medlock burst through the wall of the cemetery at Philips Park. The storm that lashed Manchester on the 13th of July 1872 was like nothing ever seen before or since on the streets of England's rainy city. To the northeast, close to what is now the Etihad Stadium, the River Medlock became such a torrent that it took out 2 bridges. But that was nothing compared with what happened when the flooded river reached the nearby Manchester City Cemetery at Philips Park. The water suddenly burst through the cemetery wall and began racing across the section of graves where the city's Catholics were buried. It was the start of an afternoon so horrifying that it is still spoken about in that corner of the city today. The result was indescribably distressing and ghastly, the Victorian chronicler of Manchester's history William Axon later wrote. It was the families living near the river's edge who saw them first. Bodies had been washed out of their graves and were floating downstream. A story in the Penny Illustrated described how mothers and children stood aghast on the bank as dozens of bodies began sweeping past. They floated down to Ancoats Bridge at Pin Mill Brow, where some of them became stranded among the trunks and branches of trees that were also downed in the flood. Soon, police officers were fishing out bodies and taking them to Fairfield Street Police Station. Others floated into adjoining cellars and gardens, the newspaper said. In the garden of one beer house, 4 naked bodies floated. Anybody with a spark of generous sympathy in him must have had his feelings deeply touched to see here and there little groups of poor people tearfully watching the raging flood, lest any moment the graves of those they were wont to treasure as their most dear and precious were deluged by the water and their bodies carried headlong down the stream, wrote the Manchester Examiner. In addition to the horrifying scene, the Great Flood, as it became known in Manchester, caused untold damage to homes of the living. In Palmerston Street in Ancoats, the water was reported to have reached some bedroom windows and people had to be rescued using rafts. Among the worst affected were the poor souls living to the southeast of London Road train station, now Piccadilly. In the low-lying slums there, where thousands of people were packed into alleyways and confined courtyards, the effects of the flood were said to be fearful. Houses had been gutted by the swollen stream, and in many cases every stick of furniture and all the clothing has been swept away by the relentless rush of water, the Manchester Times wrote. In Charles Court, which stood below the level of the river and hemmed in by high walls, the cellar dwellings were completely submerged beneath water, mud and filth. Hundreds of women, the newspaper said, were wandering the streets or crouching in front of their homes, waiting for help that would not arrive. Amazingly, according to Axon, only 1 person died in the flood. Some with natural energy of character have set to work to repair as best they may the ruins of their wretched homes. Others, in blank despair, are crouching amid the wreck of their furniture, surrounded by ragged and wailing children, and utterly bewildered and stunned by the calamity which has befallen them, said the Manchester Times. When the water finally subsided, an inquiry was held to find out why so many bodies of the city's Catholic poor had been washed away. The town clerk was forced to deny that Manchester Corporation knew, when the cemetery was being planned, that the Catholic section was unsuitable for burials after 2 previous floods. Canon Edmund Cantwell, the parish priest of St. Patrick's Church in Collyhurst, refused to bury more parishioners there. Another priest, Father Gornall, said he had it on good authority that the Catholic ground was meant to have been a shrubbery. Half of Manchester was in a ferment because it was believed that up to 500 bodies were missing, the inquiry was told, although the corporation claimed only 72 were swept away. The flood led to the priests opening a new cemetery, St. Joseph's in Moston, which is still in use for Catholic burials today. It is more than 2 miles from the river. We have the previous promise by the corporation that the cemetery was safe, and it is the duty of those in authority to say that no recurrence of calamity so revolting shall take place, Father Gornall told the inquiry. There is nothing equal to it in the history of any country. For all we know, he added, hundreds of bodies have been washed to the sea.